Okay, so we're gonna proceed continuing our reverse engineering journey so that we can understand more of our project. So before I finish our index the TSX, our root page, and right now inside that we're gonna dive deeper to a new page that we have here, which is new game. So if you can recall here inside our index the TSX, we have a button for new game. So you can see here that we have this button for our new game, wherein we're gonna be redirected to a link we're gonna call new game. So let's test that out. Once we click this, we're gonna be directed to new game. You see new game page. Okay, so going back to our new game page, we have there, let's just review our goal here. So by the end of this video, we're gonna understand how this page is built, this new page or new game page. We're gonna also review the basics of useState, what the components are, props, what state is, event handlers, and routing. Also, we're gonna review how this data flows through this React page. So as you can see here, this is the finished product of new game page, but we're gonna need to understand why this is in such state. So we're gonna see here title, some text box, some drop downs, buttons, and create game button. So whenever I learn to understand a project, I never understand first or never start with the code, but rather I ask and answer this question: how did this React build this page? And today we're going to answer that. Since I have opened now this new game TSX, we're gonna see export default function new game. So since this is the starting part and this return is the one that renders the whole page, we're gonna examine some terms. So here inside the JSX, before we gonna dive to our JSX and to our return, we're gonna see here some use state that we have declared queue with you, the name of our player. So use state, let's React remember the information. If we need to have a storage of information wherein if we move across pages, we need that data to persist and to be passed on. Use state is the hook you must have. So the basic structure of use state is we start with const, then the name of the use state, in this case name, and it always have a prefix wherein this is a function that let you change the name. In this case, we have queue with you. So if we try to break this, for example, queue without you, okay, it hot reload, we're gonna see queue without you. This is the one that is being targeted. So use state is the React's memory. Without it, every time the pages refresh, the value will disappear. So let's try changing the value. So for example, we have here, we are triggering the set name target that value. So whatever we type in this page, this is gonna be populated or change the state variable that we have set for the name. Hence, we have on change. So because of this on change event handler, this text box is reading the value is stored inside this and put this inside React's memory. So since I have said event, an event is something that the user does. So when you try to click something, every time you type something, every time you hover something, there's a subtle changes that's happening. For example, when you hover this cancel button, the color changes, and others like scroll, something changes. That is called an event. Everything a user every time something a user does. So that's event. On the other hand, event handler is the code that runs when an event happens. So inside here in our code, every event is triggered using a common practice of a prefix on. So on change, on click, and there are other types of event handlers that we have. So for example, if we're gonna review every time a user types, then the event handler for on change triggers. Yeah, we have here on change. Then we're gonna call our set name function that changes our state variable. Then React gonna update the memory. Also, after that, the text box updates. So the same is for our opponent name. Since we have a state variable for name, we also have a state variable for our opponent name. So since this is a declared static John Doe, I'm gonna try to break this John Doe. If we change this John Doe, let's see. Now this is John Doe. So the name for our opponent variable state variable is opponent. Therefore, this is gonna be changed using set opponent function. Okay, so as you can see here, we have this first player section wherein what we have typed inside Q without U is being also reflected inside this section. Also for the opponent, why is this possible? Because we are using map. So since we have the state variables for name and opponent, we are just mapping those inside this by calling an arrow function. And it just shows what's inside those so that we don't need to repeat it. So since we have seen this name and opponent, this data is called an array. So array is just simply a collection of values. And since I have said map, so map is a function in JavaScript which lets you repeat something for every item. So meaning since we have this array with a data of name and opponent, Q with U, we're gonna render the button once. And second for John Doe. So since we have two data, so what if we add another? For example, we add here 3. What's gonna happen? But this is not a declared state. So our code crashes. But that's the general idea. For example, you had created a third state variable and loaded it here inside. You're gonna see another button here pop out. Since every time you map into this array, we're gonna create or generate a button which holds the name for those state variables. So what is this player comma I? So this player and I, this I represents to index. So like 0, 1, 2, 3, React numbers every item into 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth.